everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This is Richard Harris, your host of the webinar from Sales Hacker with the anatomy of a winning sales demo. I'm very, very excited about this conversation today. Have two great guests. One is Peter Cohen, who is the principal of the Second Derivative. Peter, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome to you.
Yeah, thank you. If you haven't checked out Peter's website or his blog, he has got amazing content about how to do good demos. And most importantly, I don't know if I can't remember if it's called the death of a demo or the top 10, whatever.
Stunningly Awful Demo Series.
That's right, the Stunningly Awful Demo Series. It's fantastic. Great to read. Of course, we have our sponsor today is Amit Bindov from Gong, who I think many of you know and have done several things with him, or you've met him at conferences. Amit has been leading the charge in this AI to sales conversation conversion ratio improvement, betterment, recording, analyzation. I don't know, is that pretty good for an elevator pitch, Amit? Does that sound what you guys are doing?
Hey, Richard, that's pretty good. You can have my job. You can start pitching for me.
What's it pay? It's all about the pay, so I'm all for it. Anyway, without any further ado, just want to get into a couple of other basics. If you're a first-time Sales Hacker webinar attendee, please ask your questions during the conversation. We will do questions at the end, but obviously we want to ask the questions live and in the moment so that we can really capture the value of it. We also think it adds to the excitement of a webinar and makes it less preachy and more consultative and collaborative, which is something we always like. So there are two things. One, first of all, close to 1,000 people signed up for this webinar. We are super excited. One, because of just from a Sales Hacker perspective, I think that might be an all-time record. It also tells us that both Peter and Amit are very strong people and they should be back again soon. But most importantly, it's the sales demo. This is a critical topic, and we're very happy that we've seemed to have struck a nerve. So please give us feedback on this particular webinar, what we're able to cover. If we don't cover something at the end that you really wish we did, we'd love to get that feedback to Amit and Peter back, because we know that's what we're here for, you guys. And so we're very excited about the attendance to this one. Please go into the chat feature and go in and introduce yourself. I always ask you to do that. You can mention the name of your team, the size of your team, a struggle you're having with demos in the chat feature. I'll be monitoring that. I'm also monitoring the question section. So as you have questions, please post them in the question box, and we will gladly get to them live and in the moment. So without further ado, I will get done with my housekeeping and move forward and go ahead and turn this over to Peter and Amit from here.
Hey, thanks, Richard, and hey, it's a real pleasure being here with you, Peter, and we're looking forward. I'm excited by the number of people that have joined and signed up. This is great. Obviously, it's a topic that I was always interested in. I remember reading Peter's book a while ago, and I'm excited to compare some of the things that we've found in our research and to hear Peter's thoughts and advice. So I think it's a great opportunity to share some of the knowledge. I'll start by sharing a little bit of the methodology that we've done, but what we've done, we've dissected close to 70,000 demos. These are recordings of sessions that have demoed, obviously mostly software and software as a service companies, and there are some pretty clear findings of what makes a demo successful that we're going to share and go over a few of them today. But first, before we dive in the details, I want to explain what we did, okay, and what is it we're seeing here so people understand the context. Okay, so first let's look at the data. Okay, so there are 67,000 demo recordings. So these are sessions, the tools like GoToMeeting that we're doing right now, and or Join.me or WebEx or Zoom or BlueJeans that were done with sellers and prospects. I'm always asked what industries does the data come from, And usually, so most of the companies that are doing demos are technology companies. They're software or services or business services or soft. The clients are across a number of industries. Could be hospitality, finance, technical folks, sales, marketing, across the board. Okay, so this is a mix. And what we're seeing here is universal, right? It applies to almost anything. I mean, you might get different insights if you look at your very own data. Your mileage may vary, but we try to stick to things that are generally true for a large number of cases. Okay, usually a demo is about 45 minutes on average. We'll talk about it. So you have over 3 million minutes of sales presentation. That's a lot of data to sift through.
That's a lot of mouse movements.
Yeah, so the good news that we didn't have to do a lot of listening. So nobody actually listened to any calls. I mean, obviously that's a monstrous task to do. And the fortune that we have, computer technology today can go and sift through huge amounts of data very, very quickly. I was chatting with Neil Rackham a few weeks ago, and he told me about his recent first research that they did to start spin selling, and they actually had to listen to physical calls, and it took them like a year, and they spent millions, and he was amazed that you could do these things in a matter of minutes these days. Every demo is recorded, but then it's processed. We have to separate the speakers. Sometimes there could be more than 2 speakers on a call. There could be, from the sales side, could be like a salesperson, a sales engineer, maybe some other people. And on the buyer side, it could be more than 1 people. So the range is anywhere from 2 people to as many as 10 people on a call. It is important to separate the speakers to understand who said what, okay? And then the calls are transcribed and word by word. This is all machine transcription. No humans actually were involved in the process.
Or harmed.
Sorry?
Or harmed.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll take a little time.
Right.
Then they're analyzed with AI without getting a lot of the technicalities, but actually transcribing the calls. I mean, that provides a lot of words. There are about 6,000 words per hour on an average conversation. So if you multiply, I mean, that'll be a lot of words to sift through. So usually the process, you try to aggregate data and get some higher level concept. Are there like objections, questions being asked, types of questions, topic being discussed, action items, introduction, small talk, all these things that are higher level constructs, and that's done on a call by call basis. And finally, that's the interesting part. Okay, what we're going to talk about here are best practices, okay, that can improve your conversion rate from getting from a demo to a next step. Okay, so all of the calls were matched with the corresponding CRM record. Okay, so a call is, let's just think about it simply. A call is associated with an opportunity. And what you want to see that after a demo, the opportunity moves to the next step and ultimately closes. Okay, so if it moves forward, that's considered a success. If the opportunity is lost or just moves backwards, then that was not as successful.
What if it's stagnant? What happens if it, so sometimes, you have someone, they're in your discovery phase, you do the demo, and the call doesn't necessarily, I hate to say it, we're going to have an internal discussion and then we'll get back to you, Amit. We'll let you know. Well, that opportunity doesn't necessarily move forward or move backwards. Is that tracked somehow in this data to say, well, if it stays in this stage so much time, we're going to assume it's kind of moving backwards rather than forwards?
Exactly. So if you didn't move forward within a time window, and I believe it's 60 days, okay, it means that it wasn't successful.
Got it. Okay. And that's just sort of your standard.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Great. By the way, we're having tons of questions come in, so I want to get through this data. But thank you to the audience so far. Great comments and questions coming in so far. Thank you.
Okay. That's great. Okay. And the results, once you get the demos and you have each one is dissected with features, and that we're going to talk about anything from duration of calls and talk times and behavior and the question being asked and the topic discussed and structure. And then you look at the ones that are successful. Then you get the patterns of winning sales presentation. That's what we're going to be discussing today.
Great.
So
before you jump in, I just want to throw out a couple of these questions that are coming from the audience because I think it'll help the two of you as panelists as we get to them, maybe start to identify them. So one of our questions is, the slide decks and timing on the presentation. What's the best pattern for that, right? Is it no more than this many seconds per slide or any of those things? That's one of the questions we're getting. We have another question, they're getting ghosted after their demo, right? People go into the no-show zone, right? We know this one all the time. Doesn't even have to be a demo for that to happen. The difference
Thread of no
between
decision.
Yeah, exactly, the thread of no decision. How much of your demo content should be available on your site via video, maybe before a demo, right? That's a great discussion. That might be something we cover at the end. Do you risk missing out on providing lots of demo-style content if you do too much video ahead of time? How to use the demo to just get people to talk more, right? Rather than us talking, how do we get the prospect talking? Let's see, good gosh, I don't even know if I can get to all these. Why don't we go ahead and start there? But again, these are great questions coming from the audience, and I just wanted to give the two of you a heads up on some of them.
So let me net this out. Before we dive into the linear approach that we have here, let me net this out. This can be summarized in terms of two pronouns. Any guesses of which those two pronouns are?
I'm only good with four-letter nouns.
Okay, I will tell you.
Or verbs.
Two pronouns are we versus you. And when you look at the data and you look at the results, the unsuccessful demos fundamentally fall into the category of the vendor talking about the vendor. We. This is all about our company. This is all about our product. Here's all about our offering. We can do this, we can do this, we can do this. Whereas the successful demos are all about you, the customer. Here's your situation. Here's what we understand about you. Here's what you would be able to do using our software to solve your business problems. And dear Mr. Customer, we'd love to get into a conversation with you about what you see in the offering and questions you have. That's the net of this entire webinar. So I thought I would try to apply one of the learnings that was uncovered in the webinar to this beginning portion.
Great. Awesome.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And actually, we're doing a little bit of a spoiler, but the data supports that 100%. And we'll touch about some of these questions. These are outstanding questions regarding like video, how much on the website or not. It depends. First, we don't have the data to show it, but it's a good topic. And generally, the issue is like how much do you want the buyer to be able to learn on their own? If you have a complicated product, maybe it's better to talk with them to show less, more of a trailer. If they can make a decision on their own, that you can reveal a little more. Just a point. Okay, so here's the first data point. Okay, and that's an interesting one. Duration. What's the average duration of a successful demo/presentation, the entire session?
Are you asking us? Or are you?
Yeah. I mean, you have pronouns. So now, here's the question to you.
So the answer is just long enough to satisfy what the customer needed to see for the customer to feel comfortable that both what you've uncovered in discovery and what you present in the demo is going to address their situation and provide the solutions they need. No longer and no shorter.
So we have a couple of people actually participating, so thank you to Rashida and Paresh. One person saying under an hour, the other person saying 45 minutes. In my head, I'm going, okay, but what happens when I see everybody scheduling the 30-minute demo, and then I know we're rushing to get off the phone in that last 30 minutes and 30 seconds to, well, let's have another call next week. Well, we'll get back to, So again, let's see, someone else, 37 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour is too long. It's wasted time. Great feedback from the audience.
Let me jump in and help with this, because when you take a look at rough averages, you're at risk. And I think some of the data that this study showed is that duration is actually independent, by and large, of demo success or failure. And if you think about a high-ranking individual, somebody who's C-level or senior VP, the demo length for that person, you may be able to get it done in 7 or 6 minutes, or certainly less than 10 or 15. At which point, if that person has seen what they need to see, they may say something like, folks, this looks perfect. They look at their watch and they say, I've got another meeting I'd like to go to. You guys can stay here and torture the vendor as long as you like, but I'm good to go with this offering. So for a high-ranking person, the duration might be very few minutes. A middle manager is probably going to stay longer. End users who actually have to execute the workflows, well, they may consume an hour or 2 hours or who knows, because they're suddenly realizing, oh my, I have to use this stuff. So duration, I think, is probably the least important of the parameters here, other than to recognize that you want to go only as deep as the customer has interest.
That's great. So what's the magic answer, Amit? Show us.
All right. Here's the interesting point about duration.
Drum roll.
Okay. So it turns out that the successful demos actually are longer. Okay, and I agree that, you know, it doesn't matter if it's like 47, okay? That's a fact, okay? And this shows a correlation, okay? But when we thought about and dug deeper, okay, it doesn't mean that if you make your presentation 47 minutes, you're going to be more successful, right? That's not the conclusion. But that, with the data that we're going to see down in the next few minutes, shows that actually these are good conversation. You spoke about we and you, right? It's just having that good dialogue conversation that keeps going, okay, and versus something that ends up abruptly. So we're going to see that actually good things happen towards the end of the presentation. Talk about the structure, but it seems that having like a longer presentation and the customer sticks around is a good indication, okay? And versus the opposite, that if you make it long, you know, it'll be more successful. But you definitely need to allot more time. Obviously, it depends on your buyer and the complexity of your product, okay? But this is the average successful demo. What do you think, Peter, Richard?
So as I just said, I think you've got to slice this again based on the job title that you're talking to.
Right.
What I took away from this, I wrote some notes as we were preparing this. I said, very hard to tease out anything significant on this, except that if a customer becomes engaged, they tend to ask more questions and turn the demo into a two-way, bi-directional conversation. And we may be seeing that effect here. In other words,
Exactly.
if they see what engages them, then they tend to say, okay, that looks really interesting. Now, how did you do that? Can I set up alerts? How do you do this other thing? And you've turned it into a conversation where the voice is switching back and forth between the vendor and the customer rather frequently. That makes sense to see the longer sessions.
Yep. The one thing I would say, too, that and we have a very interesting question from the audience, but the one thing I want to add to this is that please keep in mind that demos are not product training. The one thing that I see that kills every demo is showing people, well, here's how you do this, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do this, and here's how you do this. That often stems from the fact that I also think people don't pre-qualify the demo before it starts. So some of the things that I teach, and I don't know, Peter, if you teach, I'm sure you teach something similar, which is, you know, before we start the demo, I say this, look, hey, Peter, before I start this demo, look, I'm going to show you a demo that works, because if I show you a demo that fails, I know I'm never going to hear from you, Peter. Would that be fair? Great.
Absolutely.
So,
but go ahead.
Great. So with that in mind, rather than me boring you with clicking all over the mouse, what are the 4 things you'd really like to see today in this demo? What do you want to walk away from here knowing that, okay, we can solve that pain for you? If I say something like that,
that leads to one of Amit's very next points. So nice job.
Yeah, and if I can lead with that, then I know my demo is going to be quote unquote customized because it's going to be about their pain. It's going to go back to, hey, what can we do, but what can we show you? And that's what Peter was saying earlier. So it turns it all around for them. So pre-qualifying your demo before you start it is probably one of the single things I see most people forgetting to do in demos.
Excellent points. Let's move on to the next one. We still have a lot on. We're getting lots of questions. I mean, that's great.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So talking versus listening. Okay, those of you who've done the discovery calls, you might remember. So one of the things we looked at is the listen to talk ratio. Okay, how much does the seller speak versus the prospect? Okay, and it turns out that the optimal talk time, okay, for demos is 65%, okay, about 2/3. First, and I'll make two comments here, okay. First, it's a little higher than what you want to see in discovery call. So those of you in the previous webinar for discovery call, the optimal talk time is about 46%. And it does make sense for a demo because there is a lot more. People do come with the purpose of understanding something and seeing something and hearing a story. So it is higher than some of the other calls, but the other factor that is not here that we see a lot of time, especially with new salespeople, if they're not necessarily new in sales, but they're new on the job, they just joined the company, okay, either like fresh from college or just moved from another company, they tend to be a lot higher than this. So often, you know, they consider them as at 85 or 90% talk time versus 65. And that's something that is a very common problem, very frequent. So my question to you, Peter, do you have some advice for people how they can keep tabs on their talk time, how they can keep it short, and how they can, try to get closer to 65%?
Yeah, so let's be clear though, the 65% in successful demos is only valid when there's actually a conversation going on. In other words, there needs to be switches in the conversation between the we and the you, between the vendor and the customer. And the most successful demos, I think you've got a statistic that shows this, take place where the vendor's not talking any longer than about a minute and a half or something like that. And so you want to encourage switches. This means you've got to turn it from a presentation or a fire hose into a bidirectional conversation. When we're teaching methodology and how to present demonstrations, early in the demo meeting, we start off by reviewing the customer situation. So this is attaching to what Richard said. So, dear Mr. Customer, let me make sure we understand your situation. And we offer some prompts right in the early processes, the early stages. Dear Mr. Customer, is our understanding correct? And the customer is gently forced to begin to interact. So, Richard, is my understanding correct? You say, yes, absolutely. I then ask, Richard, has anything changed since we last spoke? And you say,
nope.
Very good. And as a result, what we're doing is beginning to train our customer that instead of a fire hose delivery, this is going to be a two-way bidirectional conversation. And so that's something that I think the audience should and can take away. It's not 65% overall, but it's a conversation where your audience is participating a good portion of the time. You're still talking 65%, but with lots of questions and interruptions from your customer. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And I think someone asked a really good question, very specific to this is, if we're really getting into the science of this, statistically speaking, should we see, I'm going to call it a transition statement, but how many switches do you think there should be in a demo conversation, right? Where you stop what you're saying and do what they're saying. And I do have a tip for that, but I'm curious if either of you have any data points around that. That's a great question too. Can it be scientifically proven you need 7 of them to be successful, right? Like, is there a number?
Yeah, so you're stealing my thunder, Richard, with your great questions.
This is the audience stealing your thunder. This is not me. This is the audience. This is one of the best audiences we've ever had.
Yeah, it's amazing. So yeah, exactly. Both are true. You need to keep the overall low, and I like your fire hose. What I use, it's more like, think about more like ping pong than football. It's not about possessing the ball. It's just that back and forth all the time. Lots of little interaction. Okay.
But is there an over/under? Is it 8? Is it 10? Have we not studied it yet to know that kind of a situation?
We have. Yeah. Let's. It's one of the next slides. Okay, so we have the exact numbers.
Sorry. Yeah. Not a problem.
Yeah. So here's one thing to keep in mind, and that touches on
There it is.
Peter. Okay, we did not find a single demo that led to a closed deal that involved more than 76 seconds of uninterrupted pitching. So that's, we call it the, for every call we look at the longest monologue. It means that the rep is talking without a pause. Okay, so and this is like over a minute, if you see those long monologues, that usually could be the kiss of death for your deal. Okay, so you're absolutely right. It's not just about the overall talk time. You need to keep like short, brief sentences, ask questions, think about ping pong, not football.
Yep. Here's the other thing I want to suggest too, and Peter, I want your feedback on this one is, you and I talked about this offline. Please, everybody, stop asking the question, does that make sense? That is not a valid moment. That's not appropriate.
Yeah, there's another reason for that. Yeah, and I was asked about it last week. You usually get, the answer you're going to get is yes.
Exactly.
Okay? And what you want is, what do you think? An open-ended question that gets the customer to talk. And and very few people will actually tell you, no, it doesn't make sense. No, this doesn't make sense, right?
Nobody's going to call you out.
Yeah.
Let me help with this a little bit.
Yeah.
So
what do you recommend you say, Peter? Because that's what everybody wants to know.
So there's say and do here. So one of the traditional traps for traditional demos is we tend to present feature after feature after feature. And the phrase that you will frighten the customer is, and the next really cool thing I want to show you is, and they go into it. Instead, what I recommend and we teach is the idea of breaking up the demo into chunks, into consumable components, where you're delivering a capability, hopefully in response to a customer question, and when you reach the end of delivering that capability, you offer a brief summary. So what we just showed you was, we showed you how to da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Then when you stop and pause, you've given the audience the indication that it's their turn to say, oh, okay. And then now they can say, that makes sense on their own. And then say, okay, so now how do you do X, Y, or Z? And now you've got that two-way conversation going. The act of summarizing lets the audience know that it's finished the section and it's now their turn to ask or contribute.
I think that's great. This is what I teach people, and I do this all the time, whether it's my sessions with you guys, my pre-sessions, or training sessions. I teach people to say the following. You know what? I've been talking too much. I'd like to pause here and get your thoughts. And it gives them a moment to literally let them know that I'm being a little self-deprecating. Oh my God, I'm being a salesperson. I'm talking too much. It adds a little levity and some humor. But it really does give them the immediate responsibility to respond. What I'm always trying to get at least when I ask that question, and I might even have a follow-up, is I'm trying to get them to paint a picture in the head of either them using the actual product or service or their end user using it as it relates to their pain. So sometimes my question will be like, gosh, I'm going to stop talking here, and just out of curiosity, would this solve your pain? Is what I'm showing you, am I even on the right track? Like sometimes I'll even reconfirm, is this really the pain you want me to be showing you for? And they'll go, yes. And I'll go, okay, well, how do you see I'll ask them, how do you see yourself, or how do you see your end users using this? You really want them to paint that picture, because people don't buy a product or a service. They buy a story. They're buying the story of, oh my God, I've got a pain. I need to visualize going to the doctor and getting this pain resolved. And this time you get to be the doctor. So again, in my own status, I think I hit my 76-second mark. I'll stop here and see what Peter and Amit have to say.
You're at 82. So my luxury, I have, I will still, I think we'll close the deal. But in my luxury, because I talk with a lot of salespeople, so my spiel is like, well, I've done a lot of talking. I'm concerned I'm going to go over 65%. So now would be a good time for me to pause and for you to speak, Mr.
No, I think that's great. I want to get to a couple of questions because they're coming in pretty lightning fast, which is really good. One of the questions was what happens even if you do what I suggested, or maybe Peter, you have a better way to suggest doing it. Sometimes people still don't want to share, right? They're either holding it close to the vest. They don't want to be too excited. You've even said, hey, what questions do you have? And they're like, well, I don't have any. What do you do, Peter? Like, how would you handle that?
So there's two types of demos that we should be contemplating here. The first is where sufficient and substantial discovery work has been done. And that's really where you see the highest level of success in what Amit has teased out in the data. And that's really what the 4 acts are talking about here that Amit will get into if we can get there in a moment. The second type of demo that one might consider doing is called a vision generation demo, but what we teach is the idea that it should be just enough to give an audience an idea of what's possible. And I want to differentiate quickly between a vision generation demo and a traditional overview. An overview is also known as show up and throw up, spray and pray, the harbor tour, and the IKEA demo. In other words, please let me out of the room now, versus vision generation, which might be, are you guys ready, 2 to 4 minutes long. Just enough for the customer to say, oh, I can see where this might go, and therefore to be willing to engage in a discovery conversation. But let's turn back to the successful demo strategies, and Amit.
Yeah. So here's what comes out clearly. There tends to be a structure. Okay, usually you think in theater it's talk about like a 3-act. In demos, there is a 4-act structure. So here's the first one. I'm going to talk a little bit about each one and how do you set it up. So the first one we call the conceptual overview, and people ask about like the slide where at the beginning of the show, but this is the part where you'd set the context or the framework for the conversation, and this is the problem we're solving, this is the company we are, this is the reason we exist, just a little bit about yourself and the company, and set up the groundwork for the demo that is about to come. Okay, and then the second, and that part, here's an advice. First, it helps to have it. Okay, without it, you're just starting this spray and pray. Here's a feature or a training session. Okay, so it's important to set the context. Second, here's another tip. People ask about the slides. So here's one interesting fact that we found. A lot of people, when they do the contextual overview, they talk about the company, who we are, which is important, right? It's important who you're buying from. Why would you want to buy from us, or who we are, or you're going to be, we're going to be your partners. It turns out that there's a limit to how much you can talk about, and that limit is about 2 minutes. Okay, up to 2 minutes, you're good. Okay, if you go over 2 minutes, there is a very sharp cliff. There is a very steep drop in conversion rate whenever you talk about your company for more than 2 minutes, and it's dramatic. And we never really know what the reason is, but it is possible people start to zone out up to that point, and then your demo is less effective. And maybe say again that we versus you that Peter mentioned early on. It's fundamental.
I'll just jump in and comment that I think the reason is obvious. When you've invited, if you're the customer and you've invited a vendor in to do a demo, by and large, we the customers have already done sufficient research on the vendor to have vetted them as an organization. I would not bring you in to present a demo of an hour to a team of 8 people. That's a working day, unless I had already confirmed that you were a substantial vendor and I was interested potentially in doing business with you. So the 2-minute max is an excellent rubric. I actually suggest at maximum it should be 3 sentences about the company, 3 crisp sentences, after which, let's look at those pronouns. Enough about us. It should be all about you, dear Mr. Customer.
Can you give an example of some of those sentences you might suggest, Peter, in theory?
Sure. So how long have you been in business, Richard? How long has Sales Hacker been in business?
Sales Hacker's been around 6 or 7 years, I think.
6 years. And how many customers do you guys have, and where are they located?
We don't measure ourselves by customers. We measure ourselves by volume of people paying attention to our content. So it's a little bit different.
And what's that volume?
A significant 5 to almost 6-figure number at this point.
Excellent. And in one, and here's the hard bit, in one crisp sentence, what do you guys do?
We provide a single source for people to solve their sales challenges and look for additional help.
Excellent. So then the Sales Hacker 3-sentence corporate overview is, hi, I'm Richard Harris with Sales Hacker. We've been in business over 6 years. We have how many again?
You can call it
100,000.
just a very, yeah, I don't like to say that number out loud.
Of people following our content. And then what was the one crisp sentence again?
And we're a single source for people to solve their sales-related pains and challenges.
There you go. And then enough about us. Dear Mr. Customer, let's take a look at your situation and why you brought us in for a demo today.
Got it. That's
I
really
love
good.
it. Short and
All right.
sweet. We got it.
Crisp. It's all about
All right.
encrispening.
So here's the second part, and this is a demo. Okay, and what is obvious here, this is like where you actually show the product or paint the vision. Okay, depending on what you're doing. When you dig deeper, okay, the more successful demos are almost like backwards. You don't start, we have this and we have that, but you start with the strongest point. You start with the and. You flip it, and you start with the problem that it solved. You start there, and then you explain how, versus like explaining all the elements and then seeing how they all tie together. I sometimes do that. I mean, on presentations, you know, as a CEO, just I get a lot of presentation. We need to do this project or this initiative and all, and I do something that's often annoying, but I say, okay, show me the last slide. Like, if we agree on that, then I may not have additional question. We could cut it right here. And if I don't agree, then, you know, we can discuss later. But you start with the end. Show me, like, the most important thing, the most stunning thing that your software does, then explain to me how it does, and not start building the elements up, bottom up. Thoughts on that, Peter?
Well, so I'm in violent agreement, of course. This is the essence of great demo methodology. Can you go back one slide, because this will set it up beautifully. The Act 1, where you're talking about the contextual overview, and Richard made the point that you know, the corporate overview portion should be very crisp and short and maybe no longer than 2 minutes. Well, the important portion of this is not the we, the vendor, it's you, the customer. And it really should be a crisp, clear, and sufficient summary of the customer's situation. Dear Mr. Customer, here's what we understand about your top-level challenge. Here are the problems that are causing this to be a problem. Here's the capabilities you said you're looking for. Here's the value you look to gain. Here's the timeline that you're looking to achieve. If this is all correct, now go to Act 2. So with that set up, Act 2 should be, dear Mr. Customer, here's the payoff that we believe you're looking for. And what you're looking at here is the end results, the report, it's the end of the workflow, it's the deliverable that you're looking for to help you solve your problem. And if that resonates, then we can go into the demo in as much depth and detail as you have interest. And that's the whole idea of Upside Down. Are you guys interested in some ancient history of when I first came into some of these ideas? It was a CRM system demo. Anybody interested?
Yeah, I want to hear this.
I'm interested. Yeah. I'm just trying to watch the time, Peter, and maybe if there's time we could get into that. Just we have like 6 more
Your choice.
points.
You make the call.
I can go long. I think most people will. So, oh yes, more slides coming from the audience.
Okay. All right. Very quickly, and no longer than 76 seconds.
Go for it.
CRM demo. I was the head of sales. I was on the receiving end. The guys come in and they show a traditional linear CRM demo. Let me show you how to set up a record, how to run a campaign, how to progress that campaign, how to nurture that lead. And at the very end of 55 minutes, they said, hey, we're just about out of time. What we'd show you at this point is the forecast and the pipeline. What do you think me as the head of sales was most interested in?
The forecast and the pipeline.
The forecast and the pipeline. Everything else is how you get to that point with everybody else in the system. So they missed the mark. If they had turned the demo upside down, if they had applied this inverted pyramid idea and led with the headline and the most important stuff, I would have been engaged in the first few minutes. But instead, they squandered 55 minutes of demo and then ran out of time before they could actually show the person who was the buyer exactly what that person was interested in. How'd I do on time, Amit?
Perfect. 75 seconds. That's a very important point. A lot of people build it bottom up versus like starting with the most important things first. Just grab their attention, then explain how and what, just the minutia, but don't do it the other way around. Someone asked, and I think a few people asked about the interaction, okay? And this touches on a lot of the points that we have touched previously, but you can see here, this is a diagram of an interaction. There's a little more here at the beginning, maybe some small talk, maybe some customer talking about their problems of paying, why they're here, what they're looking for. Then there's the demo part where there's more of a salesperson speaking, okay, overall 65%, and a little bit like back and forth, which is good, okay, not a single big monologue. And here, often towards after the demo, the upside down demo that Peter mentioned, there's the stage of accelerated interaction. There's a lot of interaction going on, lots of back and forth. Question, can you do this? Can you do this? What about this? Does it work with my X? Does it work with my Y? What about your security? What about these things? That's a very positive signal. This is something you should be looking for. Okay, this is good. People that ask good questions are good. People just yeah, that makes sense. Are not good. They're either not serious, not engaged, or you haven't done a great job. That's a very positive. That's what you want to see after you've done the demo. Lots of back and forth. Make it interactive, and that's pretty typical. Okay, if you remember that the successful demos last longer. It doesn't mean that if you do them longer, they're more successful, but that's probably part of the reason because there's a lot of good questions, a lot of follow-up questions. People will, even if you schedule 30 minutes, might stick around for longer if it's interesting and you had a good interaction. We've asked about the speaker switches, okay, the ping pong. Okay, there's an increase. There's a very clear increase of 36%. Not something that's easy for us to measure like in real time, okay, but very clear and distinct increase in switches per minute. Most people are around anywhere from 20 to 30 switches per minute. There's a lot of like short stops, okay, and there's an increase towards the later part of the call. Okay, so that's and we'll be happy to share some maybe after the call. We'll post some either on Twitter or some of the average and medians of switches per minute for regular calls.
So now let's talk about how somebody can actually achieve this, because this is what people want to achieve to have a successful demo. And can you go back one slide, if you would, please?
Sure.
So when you're talking about accelerated interaction, let me give a suggestion of what we traditionally have done with demos and presentations and what we have to change to actually make this happen. And traditionally, when we're doing a demo and we hear a question from one audience, we answer it. And we hear that same question from another different audience, we answer it again, but we begin to think, hey, I heard that question before. We've heard that same question from 3 different audiences. We tend to think, well, they always ask that question. And so, Richard, what do we tend to do with the answer?
We usually throw it in our demo.
We put it into our demo.
Yeah.
And what we do, when you think about traditional demos, that people will roll on for 10 minutes and then say, so are there any questions so far? And the audience says, nope, I'm good. And what's going on here is they have eliminated the possibility for a conversation, for this accelerated interaction, because they have pre-answered all the typical questions that one might typically get. And so a way to solve that problem is to strip off your demo, if you will, all the pre-answered questions that you typically expect to get, and instead have the answers ready to go, but in a virtual sense, put them behind your back. So when the customer says, so now how do you set up an alert, you think in your head, wow, this is perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping he'd ask at that point. So you then answer the question, summarize, and the customer says, oh, okay, so now how do I make a change to the form we're looking at? And now you have caused that accelerated interaction, that conversation to take place. In fact, I like to suggest that your demo is going perfectly when the customer, well, let me ask this. I'll ask you guys. What do you think is happening if the demo is going perfectly?
There's more interaction, actually.
And the customer is actually asking the question you hope and expect them to ask at that point. That's how you know it's going really, really well. Amit,
Right.
does that agree with the data?
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing here. And I mean, you know, maybe obvious to say, but I mean, that's a stronger experience for the buyer. What you want to make is a memorable impression of that vision of how your product can solve the problem. And doing beats listening and hearing. So if you talk, they maybe get like 50, 30%. If they ask questions and they say things and they do things, I actually force people to think. I give them like tough problems to solve on calls. Just make it very experiential. It's more memorable, and then you left an impression. Your messages and your product just will you know, stay longer in their mind, and that's been a much more positive experience. So interaction is key. You mentioned about the canned question. One of my pet peeves, okay, is I'm glad you asked. Okay, what that really means, I already know what you've asked. I've been asked at a time when we have a great answer for you, and it means you're not, sometimes you could miss a lot of subtleties, okay, what the customer is asking. This is maybe not be exactly what you want to, what you thought you've heard. And, you know, I try to get rid of it. Not like, great question, I have to ask, boy, do I have an answer for you.
So I don't mind that. I'll teach people is that I will answer the question that they ask. Say, hey, that's a great question. Here's the answer. By the way, what made you ask that question?
The inverse approach to what would be like.
And the reason someone asks you that question is often the question they're trying to answer. And, you know, I'll quickly, just the quick story is, if someone says, well, how much does it cost? It's better to say, well, it costs X. By the way, does that fit in your budget? I don't like asking that question. I say, it costs X. By the way, what made you ask that question? Oh, because you know what? We've set aside some budget, but we may be pulling from 2 or 3 other budgets, so I need to figure out who all is going to participate. You get answers like that when you ask them what made you ask the question versus assuming you know the answer they want. So I teach this is called always answer a question with the question. Answer their question, but then ask them something back. So we'll go back to the demo now. Sorry.
Good point. The last part, and that's also obvious, everybody knows that, but a lot of people just don't do it, is the wrap up. Remember, like the 4 acts, the contextual overview, the upside down demo, the accelerated interaction, and then the close or the wrap up. Okay, here is an interesting fact. Okay, people ask, Richard, you brought the pricing issue. So common question that we get asked is about pricing. Should we like discuss it like early on or later on? And here's what we're seeing, okay, that if you look, there are 2 charts here, and this is over the entire duration of the call. You can see that the pricing discussions of successful calls tends to be more towards the end of the call. That's the highest concentration. And the unsuccessful demos, they are scattered. There's a little more even and, you know, more towards the beginning of the call. Okay. Which will resonate well. People say, like, you know, price after you establish value, right? First the value, then the investment. But that's also a good buying signal. So if people don't ask about it at all, maybe they're not serious. If they're obsessed with it at the beginning of the call, okay, that's a red flag, right? That maybe they're, who knows, they're trying to get a quote to just present their competitor.
Is what I see all the time.
Yeah, exactly. So that's something to be aware of.
Do you have data here on, I'm sorry, do you have data on what level is asking the question, and or is it the vendor offering the pricing information unsolicited, or was the customer asking for pricing information?
This is where the discussion happened. It's a real discussion, not just someone asked or someone that there's like a real conversation about pricing.
Okay.
substantial, not just the word mentioned. Okay, so that has been a topic, a significant topic of conversation, more just a word or two. Okay, so that they've been spent a good amount of time. If it happens like early on, okay, it's a red flag, and also not necessarily a good behavior for the buyer to start with the pricing. I know some people like to qualify people out. Is this something you can afford? But turns out that's not always a winning strategy. Okay. Yeah, so the last thing about next steps, okay, about closing, that we spoke about the reps, okay, there's a very clear difference, okay, and remember this is like a 45-minute call on average, or maybe 50, okay. The successful demos and successful reps, the reps spent about 3.5 minutes discussing the next steps versus 2 minutes. So more than 50% more than the unsuccessful demos. Okay.
And I think one of the things we can tease out of this is something that is delightfully known as transition vision. When a customer has seen a demo and they've gotten to the point where they're thinking, you know, this looks really interesting, I can see myself using this to solve the problems that we've talked about, there's a gap. And the gap is, and the customer may not even know that there is a gap, but the gap is how that customer is going to go from their current painful, bleeding state through deployment all the way to the point where they're actually getting value from the offering. And that process is called transition vision. And the vendor that has that conversation with the customer right after the demo, or even better in some cases in the latter stages of the discovery, is much more likely to succeed, and that I think is what you're seeing here. I would be intrigued to see if you could look through the data and see what were the conversation elements that contributed to those that 3.5 minutes. My guess is it had to do a lot with, dear Mr. Customer, why don't we talk about how we can help you go from where you are today through implementation all the way to go live, and in fact to the point where you're able to declare an internal victory, a value realization event.
Right. I think what we're seeing here, that's a very good point, a transition. And you know, if I want to be cynical, I mean, that what separates marketers from closer, right? You're just educating the customer versus you're moving something, you're moving a deal forward. These are like concrete next steps. Okay, we're going to schedule a meeting with this and this person on Monday, 2 p.m. Let's put in the calendar, make sure everything's covered, okay, and very cover all the details, versus people that had something as like shorter, more loose. Okay, so you do need to take the time. You've had a great demo, it was successful, you had the accelerated interaction, you did the upside down demo. Make sure you take the time. There's very clear next steps at the end. That's the ultimate success. That's how you ensure that it actually moves forward versus gets stalled or lost.
That's great.
Yeah. So
can you go back to the slide that showed the inverse pyramid? Because I think it's worth talking about that. We jumped over that.
Yeah.
I think it was further back. Talked about the upside down demo, but you had it as you led into this session. Go back a couple more slides, I think. It described the idea. Try one more.
This one? This one?
No, it showed inverse pyramid, because I actually had it on the slide. Well, the idea here is it was I think when you showed the entire timeline.
Yeah.
This is the first slide.
The opening slides.
It's probably opening slide.
There we go.
That's it. So I guess so excited. So the inverse pyramid, Act 2. Act 1, we have set the stage. We've reviewed the customer's situation. We've confirmed with the customer that our understanding of their situation is accurate. Now we start Act 2 by showing the end results, the end deliverables. This idea of inverse pyramid is enormously valuable. And the example I love to use in Great Demo Workshops is a newspaper, for those of us who actually remember physical newspapers from last century. But how journalists are taught to write news articles is the same on physical newspapers as it is in the web, and they follow this idea called inverse pyramid, which simply says, put the most important stuff in the article where?
In the headline.
In the headline, and then underneath that is?
Subheadline.
So, then the caption. Then the first paragraph, which is the crisp overview of everything else that's in that article. Now, here's the intriguing thing about newspaper articles that we can follow and apply to the world of demos, and that is people read as far as what? As far as what? In an article. How far do you read, Richard?
Probably the third paragraph, fourth paragraph.
Yeah, well,
I decide if I want to go any further.
I read it first.
Yeah, the point I'm trying to make is we go as deep as we have interest. And that's what inverse pyramid teaches people drafting newspaper articles to do, to structure the article such that the most important stuff is at the top, and as they go deeper and deeper and deeper, they're getting to finer and finer levels of detail. Well, guess what? If you organize your demo that way and turn it into a conversation, you can effectively keep checking, dear Ms. Customer, have we gone as deep as you have interest? At which point, if they say, yeah, I'm good, guess what? It's time for Act 4.
Yep.
Yep.
That makes sense.
That's the close.
Yeah,
That's
it
the
makes
money.
sense.
Everybody, does that make sense? We want to make sure that makes sense for everyone. There are 10% of the times where you can ask that question. And I do want to be conscious, fair to Amit and Peter, because I do want to give them a little bit of a chance to tell about what they do, how you can get in touch with them. We've got about 4 minutes left till the top of the hour. I can go a few minutes extra if certain audience members can, or if our presenters can. But Peter, Amit, I want to sort of go back to you as to how much more we have to show here from your demo perspective.
I think we're spot on time. We're leaving 3.5 minutes just by the playbook for next steps and some Q&A.
Great. So let's talk about some next steps and Q&A, and while you're setting up the slides, tell us what.
Right. So
tell us where people can get a hold of you.
Right. So first, I'm very easy. Just connect to me on LinkedIn. I mean, that's the easiest part. If you want more of this data, I mean, there's a lot more, or you want to post some question, just go to our LinkedIn or our blog. There's gong.io/blog. There's like almost every week, there's a new article with new data. It's fascinating. You can comment and you can ask questions. Sometimes we'll answer. Sometimes community will answer. And sometimes, hey, here's an idea for research. I got a great question here about the video and number of slides. I mean, that's a great area for research for one of the upcoming articles. So, we'd love to see you there. And if you have comments or you want to share, you're more than welcome. So gong.io/blog. And me personally, Amit Bendov at LinkedIn. There are not a lot of us out there, so it's very easy to find. Just connect, and we'll be happy to get in a conversation.
Peter, how can people get a hold of you?
Oh, it's pretty difficult. No, it's very, very easy. Hold on. Can I send this to everybody? Nope. I was going to send a chat to everyone. But www.secondderivative.com, all spelled out, is the easiest way to get to Great Demo. www.secondderivative.com, all spelled out. Or, to make it easy, just search on Great Demo. It's likely you'll find me and the organization.
Great, and I assume you're on LinkedIn too. Sometimes
absolutely.
That's
Oh yeah, there's also the Great Demo group on LinkedIn, which folks
cool.
who are watching this webinar, you are more than welcome to join that group. It's a users community for skilled demo practitioners.
Oh, that's really good. I did not know that existed. Cool.
You're welcome to join.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions from the audience, if that's all right. If everybody's got a minute or two, sure. So, and I've seen this particularly in the Bay Area. Which is, what if you're at that evangelical cycle, right? Your product actually is that new, right? For example, at one point, Gong was not as familiar with people and what you guys are able to do. You were in a more evangelical mode versus and teaching people about the industry versus just about solving their own pains. And I think the question from the audience is, we know we have to do a little bit of industry stuff, but how do I make it interactive enough for the person to engage with me rather than me standing there lecturing the whole time? And I hope I got that question right.
Yeah, so we started with a demo early on, and actually we didn't talk about a lot of industry. I can say about our experience, and we make it interactive by asking questions. First, we ask, do you have this problem? Are there like gaps between your top performers and the middle of the pack? What do you do about it? Okay, what if you could do this? And then we start demoing one capability versus the other, just like we say. And, you know, and also the first people that tend to buy from you are just people that are very excited. They're the early adopters, so they're easier. They get excited much more easier, and it actually gets harder, okay, as you go become a little more mature, because these are people who are less enthusiastic, and, you know, they want to see really how you solve the problem. They have a lot more questions. So that's how we did it, but it's just talk. Just forget about presenting. Just talk, ask questions, be really curious about the customer, learn their operations, you know, get to know the person. Just talk like you're having fun. That's
so two ideas I can share. One is, and Amit, you just described it perfectly. For those who are in that mode of early stages, definitely get a copy of Geoffrey Moore's seminal work, Crossing the Chasm, because that's exactly what you were facing, and read enough of it to at least understand where you are. The other is to, we mentioned this earlier, a vision generation demo is just enough. It's an appetizer, just enough to give the customer an idea of what's possible. It's the art of the possible. There's an article on my website, secondderivative.com/articles.html, called, let's see, it's called Vision Generation Demos, the Crisp Cure for Harbor Tours, or something like that. You're welcome to grab it, download it, and it'll give you some ideas as to how you might actually put these kinds of demos into practice.
Got one more good question. This is a really great enterprise question. Ryan, thanks for asking. This one is, you know, you got a $100,000 solution, right? It's a big deal, and you've got multiple people on the demo, and oftentimes when you get in the group setting, the herd is quiet. How do you facilitate a conversation with the herd, right? So that you can try to get them to interact a little bit more. Should they be doing more one-on-one demos with this larger client, or should they? Is there a couple of techniques, Peter or Amit, you've seen when you've been in group demo sessions?
So this is an opportunity to really restructure your thinking. Traditional demos try to engage the broad audience and interleave everybody's interests and needs, and the end result is in fact this. It's a Gordian knot, and it's just a mess. So instead, break up your demo into chunks and address the high-ranking people first with their needs, then middle managers, then end users, and then the folks that are going to administer the software. And if you think about it, that actually maps to turning your demo 180 degrees upside down. Because a traditional demo starts up by showing how you set things up. They then go through end user workflows. They then show how that rises into management reports, and then finally into senior management reports and so forth. Flip it around, start with your executive management and what they're looking for. When they're satisfied and they're done, go on to your middle managers, as we just talked about. And when you get to workflow, now you're in a very deep conversation with the end users, and with all due respect, save the admins for the end, because the only people that are interested in how to actually set up the system are the administrators.
That's really smart. That makes total sense. That makes sense to me. All right.
You just say and answer the question.
I did. So, well, hey, Amit, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, just a quick one. Here's something I do, and I agree. I mean, it's a challenge to have like 10 people in a room, nobody talks. So I either like single people out, just hey Terry, you know, would love to hear your thoughts on it. Just ask people, or it's just hey, I need to volunteer from the audience. Just, I mean, that keeps things fun, and then you get people to talk more.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody so much for attending this webinar. It has been recorded, so if you want to share this with other folks in your organization, please do so. I know it'll be up in the next day or so. This has been a fantastic webinar. Thank you for all the people who registered and attended this long. We really appreciate it. Amit and Peter, thank you both so much for your knowledge and sharing your wisdom with everyone. I think this was really fascinating and fantastic.
And I would suggest that I think we may have sufficient interest and undelivered content to contemplate a follow-on session. So if folks are interested, let's talk about next steps.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, all right. Well, thank you everybody for your attendance and your time today, and we'll see you on the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.